Welcome to CISScript's Rare Disease Clinical Trials After Participation, Paying It Forward. My name is Britta Dornan, and I am Senior Director of Communications and Marketing for the EveryLife Foundation. And we are very thankful to partner with CISScript on this webinar. The EveryLife Foundation, we're a nonprofit public policy organization. We are dedicated to empowering the rare disease patient community to advocate for impactful science-driven legislation and policy that advances the equitable development of and access to life-saving diagnosis, treatments, and cures. So today, we're pleased to present this, this webinar for you today. And this is Joan Chambers with CISScript, and she will be joining us today. She was hoping to be here to help welcome you this morning, but hopefully she'll be joining us later today in our presentation. So this is our agenda, a quick look. I'm going to review with you the key learnings that we'll be learning today. I'll give you a quick recap of the first and second in this series of webinars presented by CISScript. We'll do a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we'll get going on our talk. So we have a quick, so we can get to know, now that you know who I am, we want to get to know who you are. So we're going to take a quick poll. We want to know, please select the choice that best describes you. If you are a clinical research professional, a medical healthcare professional, a participant in clinical research, a parent or caregiver, or a member of the general public. So please cast your vote so we can know who is with us today. All right, and I see that we have about 50%, about half of us here today are clinical research professionals. And then about 20% members of the general public interested, a little under 20% are parents and caregivers, 21% are participants, people who participated in clinical research, fantastic. And about 8% are medical and healthcare professionals. Wonderful, great, excellent. All right, so let's go to our next slide. This is what we're going to learn today. We are going to learn how some clinical trial participants chose to become advocates themselves to share their experiences, the ways that they've shared their experiences, how they've responded to some interesting questions from friends and loved ones, and what are the benefits of sharing their experiences. All right, so back in the spring, and these recordings are available for you on YouTube, the first webinar covered a general overview of clinical trials, how it works, what to ask, how to be informed about when clinical trials become available in your disease area. The second webinar was how to prepare for when the trial ends. What does it mean to participate in a clinical trial? What happens when it's over? And the questions to ask before it's completed. So I encourage you to view those recordings. All right. So let's go to our next slide so we can meet our contestants here. So in case you're coming to us late, my name is Britta. I'm with the EveryLife Foundation. I lead communications and marketing there. And I am a big proponent of paying it forward as the title of this webinar, which means sharing your story and experiences for others to benefit. And that's why I created a blog for my rare disease. I live with primary lymphedema, and so I created a blog called lymphedemadiary.com, and I share my experiences, and that's my way of paying it forward. And so that's me. And when I'm not moderating panels, I'm hanging out in Arlington, Virginia with my husband and 2 spoiled cats. So so as I mentioned, I have not participated in the clinical trial myself, but the reason that I volunteered to moderate this panel is because I am a huge proponent of sharing our experiences to affect change. And that's what we're talking about here today, because it is the story that drives the heart, quite literally, as it turns out. A new study released last month reported that when people listen to the same story, no matter where they are, their hearts their heart rates rise and fall in unison. So it's not surprising that when a story captures our attention, we're more likely to absorb the information that's being told to us, more so than with just data and facts. So today we're talking with 3 people who have wielded this power of storytelling to share their experiences in clinical trials. So let us meet Ryan Colburn. So as you can read by Ryan's bio on the screen, you can't say he doesn't have a sense of humor. Ryan, but on a serious note, Ryan was diagnosed with Pompe disease in 2015. And since that time, he has immersed himself in the rare disease community. He has been a very active advocate, willing to do anything. I can attest to that. He even allowed me to rope him into being the Rare Voice Awards MC last year. And something that he said when I met him last year really stuck with me, and it's there in his bio for you to see. He said that he wants to shift the view from patients as subjects to one of being participants, collaborators, and partners. And that really stuck with me, and that says a lot about who Ryan is. So let's meet Kim. Dr. Kim Stevens is the president of Project Alive, and that is a nonprofit organization dedicated to research and advocacy for Hunter syndrome. And Kim's amazing son, Cole, has Hunter syndrome. So of course, this mission is quite personal for Kim. She is an extremely generous and thoughtful advocate who serves as a mentor for newly diagnosed families. And I can tell you, she's always there when I call her for advice on anything. But what I didn't know about Kim is that she has an extensive background in diversity and inclusion and topics such as implicit bias, unconscious bias, and cultural awareness. So these issues are certainly relevant for a discussion on clinical trials. So I'll be interested to see if that comes up today. So welcome, Kim. Thank you. And now let's meet Mark. Mark was diagnosed in 2007 with cicatricial, which means scarring, pemphigoid. It's a rare autoimmune blistering skin disease. And so Mark knows all too well the challenges of delayed diagnosis and treatment, having lost the vision in his left eye from the disease. This experience drove him into advocacy, where he's been over the past 10 years, working his way up to becoming the executive director of the International Pemphigus and Pemphigoid Foundation. And as you can see by his bio here, he serves in many capacities for all sorts of prestigious organizations. And we are especially thankful at the Every Life Foundation for his contributions as an RDLA advisory committee member. And I'll brag a little bit more about him to say that he and his daughter, Hannah, have been nominated for a Rare Voice Award this year. So tune in on December 15th, 7 p.m. at rarevoiceawards.org. I believe, Mark, that you and Hannah are the first father-daughter combo to be nominated in a single year. So congratulations. So Mark, now that I've sufficiently embarrassed you, why don't we start with you for our discussion today? So we've got a few questions here that I want to ask you. And Mark, give us an idea, if you could, about give us a sense of your participation in clinical trials, and then tell us about the evolution of how did you choose to become an advocate and share your experience on clinical trials. It's not an easy step to take for some people. So I'm wondering, was there some pivotal moment, or was it gradual? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Thanks, Britta, and thanks to Syscript for having me join today. I think that those two things are really intertwined. Becoming or choosing to become an advocate, and deciding whether a clinical trial is something that you are interested in or want to participate in. So in my particular case, like lots of people that have rare diseases or just diseases in general, it took a long time for me to get diagnosed. And I saw lots of different physicians So took about 6 months, which is actually a relatively short time, but 6 months to be diagnosed. And I saw 6 physicians during that period. And, that's a roller coaster. It's a journey, when you're going through this process just to get that diagnosis. And then after I was diagnosed, you really have to kind of come to terms with, now that I have this diagnosis, what next, right? And so I think for me, one of the first things I did was, and I was, as you mentioned, I was kind of in a desperate situation. I lost the vision in my eye. And so I was like, I really need to take aggressive steps. And so I thought about, well, what about a clinical trial? And, during the process, I realized that there were just so many doctors. As I was seeing all these doctors, they didn't know anything about this disease. And I was kind of angry. I was kind of mad. I was like, how come nobody knows about this disease? Like, I understand it's rare, but like, shouldn't doctors know about this? And I think as a patient or as a person, you go to the doctor and expect them to kind of know, be able to answer your questions and be able to know what's going on. And so, so I was a little angry. So I was like, well, there's got to be more doctors that know about this. And so I realized that in order for more doctors to understand this disease and know about this disease, I had to put it upon myself to become an advocate and create awareness for the disease so more doctors would know about it. And part of that process was applying for a clinical trial. Because as I said, I was kind of, I was desperate. And so I applied for a clinical trial in France and didn't meet the criteria, unfortunately, for exactly what they were looking for. But, that I think motivated me even more to say, okay, well, how, I can't do this clinical trial. What else can I do to advocate for people with my disease, so that they don't have to go through what I go through or that I was going through? And that was kind of the aha moment for me, where that was the pivotal moment where I said, okay, I'm going to create disease awareness. I'm going to make more people knowledgeable and understand about this disease. I decided that I wanted to become an expert about the disease. So that I, when I get in a room with researchers, I know what I'm talking about. And then from there, I just started to gradually advocate and do more things. I started working with the International Pemphigus and Pemphigoid Foundation, which is an international organization that provides support and resources for people with these diseases. And I found a community of people that were experiencing what I was experiencing, and it really gave me a lot of hope. And so from there, I started working with them, volunteering. We created a peer health coach program where peers could talk with their other people with the disease. And then through time, I ended up moving more towards the legislative and the policy advocating. And then in 2013, I made my first trip to Washington, D.C. And I was hooked. From there, I was like, okay, policy and regulations and changing those things is really, kind of my calling. And so since that time, I've just been advocating and working in the space with lots of different organizations like Every Life Foundation and NORD and developing relationships with other patient organizations, as well as our all the stakeholders in the field. So that's kind of the evolution of things. There was kind of that aha moment, but there was definitely an evolution as I moved through this journey, and it's been just about 14 years now since my diagnosis.
So Mark, thank you. I think from something that hit me was that what I hear is that you've been filling a void, right? It wasn't like this wasn't what you intended to be doing, but you said there is no experts. Where's the help? Somebody's got to step up. So I'm stepping up. Is that something Ryan and Kim, that you can relate to?
Yeah, I think definitely, you sometimes I think we look around for someone else to sort of step up, and then we're like, oh, but what about me?
Mhm.
And maybe I'm the one that should do that. And part of my, my former life, almost it seems like at IBM, I was in executive comms. So I was working in this space. So I was like, well, I've been training maybe for my whole life to be an advocate. And Cole was diagnosed with Hunter syndrome when he was 2.5, and immediately, I was thrown into the world of rare disease, not having any experience in that area at all, but knowing that I needed to find out, what do we need to do? What are our next steps for Cole beyond enzyme replacement therapy? And so we jumped into the clinical trials world. Luckily, he qualified for a trial. We waited for 2 years, I think, to get into that clinical trial because there was a hold on it. But once he entered in, at 4.5, we started into that journey, and we didn't know what we were going to do. I didn't know at the time if I needed to quit my job and be a full-time sort of mom taking a child to the clinical trial, or what our life was going to be like, or if we needed to move to North Carolina because we were living in Tennessee and the trial was 5.5 hours away. So you really go through all of these things thinking about that. And Cole's been in the clinical trial now for over 6 years. And so part of that is not wanting someone else to go through a clinical trial. I think what Mark said is a lot of our motivation is if we can help someone else not do what we've been doing or not go through what we've been going through, then that's a big plus, right? And been in a trial, having been in a trial now for 6 years, I think that you start to learn things that maybe you would do differently, and that you would say, well, this would probably make the trial more successful. And you want to share those things because, with Cole and with a progressive disease, I want to make sure that all the clinical trials are successful in our space, because we can't afford for any boy to be in a clinical trial that's going to fail, because we know that this is a progressive disease where most boys don't live into their teens. So there's real urgency for me to get out there and make sure that I'm helping all of the clinical trials in our area, or rare disease in general, to make sure they pick good endpoints, that they've set the trial up for success, and that they're thinking of the clinical trial process as from when the child walks out the door, or the caregiver or whoever, the participant, to use Ryan's word, walks out the door, to when they walk back home. That is the clinical trial process. It doesn't start when they walk into the clinic. So I'm a big advocate for them thinking about that as a process, and making sure that they get patient advocates involved early.
Yeah, I'm seeing Ryan nod his head.
Yeah, from my side, similar destination, but different story. So I don't think I ever, even to this day, thought, oh, I'm going to be an advocate. I sort of, similar to picking from Mark's story, I was diagnosed and kind of started trying to learn what I could about it for myself, just so I understood what Pompe was, and continued to kind of figure out that there was a lot more questions that I had that did not have answers than the ones that did have answers. So I just kind of dug deeper, and sort of one thing led to another. And as it relates to clinical trials specifically, my mindset is one of participation, but one of that clinical trials are sort of this formal way that we can ask questions and learn something about our disease. And so if I want to promote the learning part of it and the asking questions part of it, then that's something that I can do. And if we take a really long time to answer these questions, the questions stop coming. It's a supply and demand thing. So if you're a researcher and you don't have anybody to help answer your questions with you, then you go work on something else. And so thinking about that seems way more awful than the disease to me, the day that we stop being curious. So this participation is one really important way that we can foster overall curiosity, learning about our diseases. I think one of the things, just sort of echoing Mark and Kim in a different way, is I was shocked to find out how little we know about Pompe, and honestly, we have quite a lot of industry interest in Pompe, so we're a fortunate one. So I want to participate in, like, how do we learn a lot more, and if that participation has been called advocacy, that's, like, I guess, something that I never intentionally set out to do.
That's
Ryan, can you give
interesting.
us-
I was going to say, it's interesting just kind of listening to Kim and Ryan. I mean, it really, all of this stems from understanding, learning more, and asking questions. And I think as a patient with a disease, or a caregiver, a parent, I mean, that's what happens as we go, okay, well, why? We really are trying to find these, find these answers and learn. And I think with clinical trials, like Kim was saying, I mean, we need to, not only learn from our diseases, but also learn from the successes and even the mistakes that are made in clinical trials to help us better understand these diseases. And, so I was really just kind of intrigued by listening to both of them say, speak about those things.
Yeah, I agree. The being curious, that word stuck out to me from Ryan. And Ryan, can you just give us a quick sense of I know that you've had a number of opportunities to participate in clinical trials. Give us a sense of your background there.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a how many cards in the playground did you collect kind of thing, and that's not the game we want to get into. But just to give a sense that trials can be these long multi-year things, or they can be a day long. So I've by my latest count, we're in double digits in terms of consents and studies that have participated in. And some of them have been as simple as giving a blood sample so that we can help learn better techniques to do newborn screening. And some of them have been probably more similar to what Kim's experience is, where it's traveling regularly to get an experimental treatment, injected into your veins.
Right. So that's what a lot of people wouldn't know. They would think it's more of the classic years long, you travel to a different state to get there, but it's not necessarily that. It can be something short term.
It's the whole range. And I think, participation has to make sense for you. It should not be like this sacrificial hero's aspiration. It should be, hey, like, let me figure out what makes sense with where I'm at, or where my family's at, or what's going on in our lives. And not assume that, because we're busy, or because we have other things going on, that we can't somehow participate if that's something that's important to us. And on the other hand, there's a lot of folks in all of our diseases, and I'm sure we all have friends that are across a whole spectrum of progression and whatnot. So that plays into, okay, how can I participate for other ones that, Mark was excluded from participating in a trial because of some perhaps very narrow banded criteria. I know in our disease in Pompe, most trials they sub-select such a small cross section of the population that it's frustrating that we're not actually helping everybody. So there's this need to, for me anyway, I feel like that's one of the factors into my decision, is how can my participation help more than just me.
I think Ryan's right. I think you really have to think about, well, how can I participate? It can be something simple, or it could be more detailed and more entailed. So, you could participate in a short study. You can join a registry. You can give blood samples. So there's lots of ways to participate. The key is just participate, I think. So, I think that's important.
Yeah, and I've done ones where there isn't any poking or prodding involved. There's just how do we learn some things that we want to know about the disease.
Yeah, and I think, Ryan, you brought up a good point, and Mark as well, this sort of exclusion criteria thing. And this is another reason that I advocate and talk to pharmaceutical companies that are starting clinical trials is, a lot of the time we just seem to create this exclusionary criteria without necessarily thinking about, why are we doing that? What does that mean? Or how could we think of it another way? Because we've been talking to companies now, and there were many boys in our community that were worried about being excluded, the boys, but more the caregivers worried about being excluded from clinical trials because of hydrocephalus and having shunts. And, it's like, okay, well, let's not put that as a criteria necessarily and think we can't put them in there because they have a shunt. Let's think about the mechanism behind that shunt and why are we excluding them? Well, we're excluding them if we're doing something that's directly into their brain, thinking that it won't have time to really marinate, to use non-scientific terms, in their brain because the shunt would drain it out. Well, can we shut the shunt off for just a little bit for this time to go forward? So really, I think as advocates, we're always there to saying, well, what about this? Or have you thought about this? Or I'm hearing that other trials are doing this. Could you think about that? And always just sort of pushing a little bit on, the exclusion criteria, thinking more broadly. Like I'm pushing companies now to think about treating our boys that are older, not just doing treatments for newborns or through 5-year-olds, but what about the boys that haven't been able to be in a clinical trial? Could we put them in clinical trials? And just to get that thinking going, to say, okay, well, they're nonverbal. How do we test them cognitively? Well, let's think about this. And really, again, just sort of pushing a little bit so that it's not just these sort of cut and dried, let's do this trial, all the same way, but really thinking about how do we include as many kids or as many patients in a clinical trial as we can.
Yeah, to Kim's point, I mean, I would say, it's really important to create dialogue with your partners, pharmaceutical partners, early. So that way they have the opportunity to understand the patient perspective and what the burdens of the diseases are for the drugs, for the people that they're trying to develop drugs for. So, I know we try to facilitate focus groups, patient focus groups. So there's lots of different ways to create that dialogue and create that interaction between patients and pharma so that they understand, hey, we can or we can't, this is what we should include as criteria. This is what we shouldn't have as criteria. So I think it's important because, trials are hard. And we all know that, a lot of them fail. And a lot of it stems from not having the right inclusion or exclusion criteria and failing to talk with patients about what's important to them before they design the trial. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think like none of that sounds like advocacy to me. All of that sounds like talking to experts to me. We with the conditions that we have, this is like shifting this attitude from subjects to participants and collaborators. I have 30-something years, 24/7, 365 of experience with Pompe, even before I knew what its name was. And Kim, since your son's birth, you've collected really a significant amount of experience. And when we paste that against the people that we are calling experts, as if that excludes us, we're calling these people experts, and they've earned a lot of that. But at best, they're studying it a few hours a day. Let's say maybe we have like the best doctor doing 10 hours a day, 5-6 days a week. I mean, it doesn't take very long before you don't take weekends off, you don't take evenings off with your disease, that you've developed a certain expertise that nobody else can have. And it's not to exclude or discount the expert of medical professionals, but it's to recognize how important our lived experience is.
So it's so true, Ryan. I mean, what you all have been talking about is one really important way to share your story, and that's with pharma. It's with the people who are conducting these trials. But you make it sound so easy. Like, how do you actually do that? How do you know who to reach out to? How do you share your insights, your expertise?
Call Mark.
I'm a notorious stalker on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And as soon as we see our community at large, and our Project Live board has been really good about this too, as soon as we hear any sort of inkling of a pharmaceutical company in our space, we're reaching out and we're saying, hey, we hear that you're interested in Hunter syndrome. How can we help? What can we do? And then at conferences, I know I speak at lots of conferences. Some may say I speak at anytime someone asks me, I'm like, yes, let me speak. But that's part of it, getting out there, maybe someone in the crowd that you connect with. I've had pharmaceutical companies come to me afterwards and say, hey, we've been thinking about Hunter syndrome, or we've been thinking about one of the other MPSs. Could you connect me with this person? So it's really just having these conversations. And, our experience in clinical trials goes beyond just our disease. A lot of the talks that I will do are just general about the clinical trial process, and making sure that pharmaceutical companies are reaching out early, that they have advisory boards, that they're thinking about, how do you get from the airport to the hospital, and support a family like that. So a lot of those are very generalizable, but LinkedIn is a good way to do it. Speaking at conferences, we have a lot of rare disease conferences that you can apply to speak to. It's amazing once you sort of put yourself out there, how people start coming to you and saying, hey, could you speak? I heard you speak here. Would you mind speaking here? And let your patient advocacy organization know too, that you want to be out there, because, I was just looking the other day, someone came to me and said, hey, Kim, can you help me with someone to speak to our employees? And I was like, okay, let me think about who might want to do that. So if I had sort of a list of people that would say, hey, next time you need somebody, let me know, and I would love to do that. Then we're always looking for that, and we can coach you and help. So there's lots of ways to sort of get your story out there. I think Ryan had a different way he does that too.
It doesn't have to be full speed right away either. I mean, it can be, for me, I mentioned that I kind of accidentally end up getting called this word advocate. It's just, being curious about stuff. So it starts with asking questions and being willing to ask questions, because it's in your best interest or your family's best interest to do so, even at your, with your local doctor, and sort of not just allowing yourself to be pushed off. Be curious. Going to an event, even if it's not if it's not specific for your rare disease, that community that Mark mentioned earlier, finding community can be a really big part of gaining a confidence, and also just kind of seeing how things are done, finding people that you trust or like or don't like, and sort of modeling your behavior as such. But then, just sort of being curious. The one thing I would say on that is, there's, from a motivation standpoint, I think that it would be, we'd have a real problem if we were not the most motivated people in the entire ecosystem. So that part is worth thinking about, and recognizing that, ending with your dialogue with your doctor and saying, okay, that's all we can do, there's a rebalance of motivation there that maybe to consider, because they want you to do well, but you need you to do well, and that's a big difference. So, but then if you do find yourself in a position where you're in front of experts, or with industry, or with other people, or in speaking in a conference, I think that there is a balance between just sort of sending it and being out there versus being responsible steward of your community. So there's definitely and there's going to be different opinions, but I've seen people who just jump up there and immediately think that they have to go full throttle immediately, and they find themselves with a great opportunity, or with a great partner in a conversation or at a conference and giving a talk, and they're not doing anything novel or new to push it forward, or they're kind of regurgitating other stuff. And so I think having for your own sake, learning what is the current state of affairs across the industry, you can still challenge that, you can still question that, but at least knowing some amount and doing your homework proportional to what the magnitude of the stage you're on is, I think is an important way to sort of continue, because quite honestly, we are fighting an uphill battle in the sense of earning and convincing our partners in the industry that we should always be at the table, and that shouldn't be like a box that they tick because they were inclusive. It should be something that they realize they do a better job, they make more money, they have a faster trial process, a cleaner trial process, everything, if we are a part of the process.
I think Ryan makes a really good point. And like I remember when I was first diagnosed, I memean, I didn't know anything about the disease. I could barely even pronounce it. I didn't, I had to practice saying it so that when I, we're telling my story, I was like pronouncing the disease properly, right? So I didn't know anything. And so, but I took it upon myself as, as maybe as Ryan said, that self-proclaimed advocate to learn about the disease. And so that way I could have a conversation with an medical expert or have a conversation with a pharma partner and understand, well, do they have a viable a drug in the pipeline that could treat our disease, and what is the mechanism of the disease, and all of these intricacies that come along. And that took a long time for me to kind of get that prowess and be comfortable doing that. But now I know if when I walk into a room with our advisors or medical advisors or experts or pharma partners, that not only do they want to hear my personal story, because your personal story is very important, but also I have some understanding of the disease and what I'm talking about. So I think Ryan's right. I mean, you have to. It just takes time. I mean, I think as an advocate or a person with the disease, or if you represent an organization, it takes time, and you have to build it.
Yeah, and I think that I like some of the words, this lived experience, but so also sort of talking to people and saying, hey, that's important. You don't have to know the disease, your own disease or your child's disease inside and out. Because a lot of times if you're talking at a conference or you're talking at a pharmaceutical company, what they want to hear is your story, your diagnosis story, maybe some of your journey that you've gone through, because that's unique to you and that's your story. And you have, like Ryan said earlier, this lived experience that they want to share that they won't get to hear any other way. I mean, I've walked into pharmaceutical companies and many times, and they've said, wow, you're the first caregiver we've talked to living with this disease. And, they're just wanting to chat and they're asking me questions and all these sorts of things. And that's wonderful. They're not asking me things about, how are gags broken down by the body and what enzyme is it missing and which gene is it? And they're not asking me those questions. They're asking me, what's it like to live with Cole every day? What does he like to do? How does he tell you as a nonverbal child what he wants? And these are all things that, there's so many people that have experience like I do that would be so valuable for you to share.
So I've heard clearly it's a big, a necessary and needed way to share these experiences, your experiences is with pharma. Those are the ones who really definitely need to hear this. And I heard the tip of, stalking on LinkedIn, but the putting yourself out there, was something that stuck with me. Just, connecting with your patient advocacy organization, going to events, even if it's not specific to your disease. What other ways have you shared your experiences? Like I know, to policymakers, for instance. I mean, have you found that to be impactful?
I just want to throw one more thing on the previous one and then transition into this. I think another important part of it is being ambitious. And so when you're having discussions with, whether it be a policymaker or a pharma partner or your patient advocacy organization, I think all too often we get sort of blinders on and think that we're having to select from a prefixed menu or a set of choices. And it's having this ambition and this imagination to say, hey, like, not what is the best of bad options, but what is the place that we should truly be going. And I think that was some of what, Kim was sharing, that was the first time that some of those people have heard that. And I know Kim would, she's not going to say, oh, make it this 1% better, make it a lot better. So I think that's a good one. In terms of policy side of things, Mark's probably a much better person to talk about that. I've definitely put some energy into the policy world, talking with lawmakers at a local and federal level. I generally don't have a ton of hope that that's going to be any kind of fast or efficient pathway to progress. I think it's important and critical, But there's people that have far more skill and patience at it than I do. So maybe this is the other piece of advice is there's a billion different ways to participate, and finding what works for you and what makes sense for you. Maybe it is going to Washington. Maybe it is learning about the way gags are broken down and doing the nerdy science stuff. Maybe it's just raising awareness through social media or through local stuff. There's lots of different ways to participate, and being willing to try out different ones and figure out what actually works for you so that you can feel good about what you're doing, which will keep it exciting for you, but then also really make a contribution matters. And for me, policy side, like some amount of energy, but definitely I think it would be a distraction to put all of the energy there, because it's really slow, and I think there's faster and better ways. But it's important, and Mark will tell us how important it is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Ryan's right. I mean, in order to pay it forward, you have to take that first step, which is always the hardest, to say, okay, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to do something. So you just have to do something, whether it's going to Capitol Hill or meeting with your local representative, or I mean, there's lots of ways to participate. You can meet with the FDA. They're very appreciative of meeting with patients and patient organizations. I know I've done that. There's opportunities to hold patient-focused drug development meetings or listening sessions. So there's lots of ways to participate with the FDA. Then there's also Health and Human Services. I've had meetings with CMS, and they're interested in talking with patients and learning from patients as well. So I think there's lots of ways to pay it forward, as Ryan said. It doesn't have to just be policymakers or through legislation. And he's right. I mean, but it takes a long time to change that stuff, right? So you have to choose your battles and apply a certain amount of pressure. But I try to diversify myself and try to work on different levels. But for me, it usually all comes back to the person that has the disease or the patient, right? So if I can create awareness or educate somebody about the disease, that's kind of the foundation of everything I do. And so when I'm able to help a father whose son has pemphigus in Hong Kong that's having trouble getting access to therapies, that's a win. Or if I can help a patient in Tennessee that wants to get a therapy and they're having difficulty getting it, and we could contact their Congress member or reach out and get expedited approval, or help them compassionate use, help them with those types of things. Again, it all just kind of goes back to how can we help patients get to a better place? How can we pay it forward?
Yeah, I think I hear you on the, working to impact and change policy is a long game. It can sometimes feel like Sisyphus, you're like rolling, pushing that boulder up, and then it keeps rolling back down over you on the mountain. But let's not overlook even just a more everyday way to pay it forward and share your story to your friends and family, whether it's in person or over social media or whatnot. I mean, what kind of questions do you get? What do people, your friends and family say to you, and what do you say back to them?
Yeah, I want to sort of answer that one and then tie it back to the legislative piece, because I really try to get involved as much as I can. And so I'm on the Tennessee Advisory Council, and then I do a lot of legislative work with you folks at Every Life, because you just have a wonderful plan there, and you can really just get someone involved pretty quickly. Plus, I'm sort of a political science nerd a little bit, so I love that, going to the Capitol and talking with the senators and our representatives. So that's always, it's fun, too. You go in their office, you get to meet. And the most important piece is really creating this sort of relationship. In all of these sorts of things, when people say, oh, you're out there as an advocate, you're in this and you're in that, and people say, are you spreading yourself too thin? And I really think of it really as I'm creating this broad network for myself and for my community, because I don't know what we're going to need in the future. Like for example, MPS II Hunter syndrome is being looked at now to be considered on the recommended uniform screening panel for the federal government. And I'm seeing connections everywhere. I talked to a geneticist in Tennessee who's wanting to add it to the Tennessee blood sample things we're doing for newborn screening. So you start to make these connections and you say, oh yeah, I was talking to Senator Blackburn's office, and you meet someone else that I met the husband of one of the leading health directors for Senator Blackburn's office. And so you start making these connections and you start building this network. And then you can, when you need something, if I have somebody in Tennessee or someone in Illinois that they need their medication and they're having trouble, then I could say, oh, let me connect you with this person, or let me connect you with that person. And as Mark said, that's wonderful. It feels like you're really doing something when sometimes it can just churn on. We've been working on newborn screening now. I have been for over 2.5 years. And I know, Britta, you and Every Life have been on it longer. So it can seem kind of churning, but I'd also point out to people these friendships that you make, these friendships now that I have of advocating with other Tennessee advocates, people I would have never met in the state. And I just had one of the moms reach out to me and she said, hey, we're doing a giveaway for bikes for kids with disabilities. Do you think Cole would be interested? And I'm like, wow, that's great. So you never know who you're going to meet and who you're going to influence. So I think all of these sort of ways that we're coming together and reaching out. And I love what Ryan and Mark said about sort of putting yourself out there. Because I know for me, I wasn't out there for a while. I was, kind of quietly dealing with Cole's disease and thinking I'm managing that. But it was a conscious decision to sort of say, I'm going to put myself out there. I've gone through a lot. I have experience to share. I want others not to have to go through quite as hard as I did. So I want to help where I can. So I think that's, important to say that, you're just broadening your community with all these sort of opportunities.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it's really difficult for them to do that, to put themselves out there and to share their story. First they have to come to terms with, the fact that they're dealing with this situation. It's a major change in your life and you feel like you're out of control. So you have to kind of come to terms with that. But then it's about, just like you said, like Ryan said and Kim said, just, you have to make that decision to say, okay, how can I take that lived experience and make it better for somebody else? And that's hard. It's hard to make that decision, and not everybody can do that. But I think, for me, I think, and probably for all the, the other advocates, it's, and Kim said it best. I mean, you just want to make sure that somebody else doesn't have to experience what you've experienced, and really be able to, to say, how can I make a difference? It's easy just to sit back and not do anything. You have to really make that decision to say, okay, I'm going to make a difference.
Yeah, I think, Kim described and Mark described this idea of like almost this coming out experience. And I very much felt that. I remember and I like Kim specifically used the word, there was a conscious moment in there. I very much recall my conscious moment when I was, there was some talk or something that I did that like essentially outed me as having this to not that anybody would ever search that, but it was there to find. And that being something that I kind of had a lot of fear over for the moment, and kind of just decided like, yes, that it was worthwhile for me to take the plunge. in a sense. I don't think that has to be if that's a concern, that's something that should prevent somebody from participating or being an advocate. There's lots of ways to do it while still maintaining anonymity or protecting your family if you think that that's the right move in the circumstance. But I think sort of acknowledging that and recognizing that your story is common. And I found a lot of peace, even talking to people outside of the Palm Bay community, but for sure inside of it. I can talk to Mark about something, an experience that I've had that even though he has a completely different condition affecting him in a completely different way, that I know that he'll understand in a way that none of my friends or family could possibly. And same thing with Kim. So I think that there's a lot of, in addition to what you can do for helping others or making it so that other people do not have to have the same difficulty in the experience that you did, there's a lot of benefit for yourself as well by being willing to talk about these kinds of things. And if you're not comfortable, or if it's not the right place for you to do it in your friend group or whatever group, sort of set of reasons, there's these disease communities that are very respectful of people's privacies, or should be, and that you can go to. With regards to my friend group and these kinds of things, what do I do within them? Britta, you asked, what kind of questions do we get? And those kind of, in my mind, it's not enough questions. This stuff's important to me. It's something that I'm infinitely curious about. And so I'd much rather, I'll talk about what happened in the hockey game last night or whatever with friends, but I'd much rather talk about like what new exciting thing is happening in genetics, and like what we're learning about genetics, or how that relates to diversity and inclusion, and like how the medical field is skewed, or what kind of things that I've seen that are wrong and what we're doing about them. And that's maybe something else is a piece of advice or a request for folks is, as you're going through your experience, and as you gain confidence in your experience, being present locally, but then also taking a broader view. And if you experience something that seems like, hey, this is way more difficult than it should be, or this sucks, figure out, like, if you can, like, okay, what can I do to participate in fixing that, so that way, like, it is it's a safer bridge to cross for the next person. And Kim talked about that, doing that one way with a pharma company as you're setting up a trial, or planning a trial. But I think that can happen within your community as well. Like, this is how we dealt with insurance, or this is how we dealt with this piece of equipment or that piece of equipment, or making these decisions. It all goes part and parcel. And again, just to reiterate for anybody who's interested, but maybe afraid of going all in, you don't have to do that. Mark said it starts out by doing something. Figure that out, and you do something a bunch of times, and all of a sudden you've really done something. And it's cool that way. It doesn't have to be this big daunting thing in front of you.
I can really relate to what Ryan's saying. I mean, it was cathartic, right? To be able to do something. And it was really, for me at least, it was part of that healing process, and me coming to terms with my condition was to be able to do something. That power that I lost when I was diagnosed, I gained back by being able to do something.
Yeah, and I would just add that, as I sit here, I recognize the privilege that I have of working for a company when Cole joined a clinical trial that was very flexible. I could take my computer with me. And part of the work that I'm doing now is talking to families so that they may not have that ability to do that. They, if they're working a regular 9-to-5 job and they're being hourly, then they can't do that sort of piece. So really making sure that we're trying to, break down these barriers, whatever they may be, whether it's location of the clinical trial, or whether it's something more substantial, then we really need to be thinking about that. So that, we haven't jumped into this topic because it could be its own webinar itself, but it's definitely something that I keep in mind. And for those that don't get out there and don't put themselves out, in the front, it's those conversations I'm having with them, because I consider it my responsibility to talk to others and learn about their experiences, so I can also relate those to our pharma companies and partners, so that they know that mine not be the typical experience. And so they're hearing other voices as well that may not be able to be as loud as mine.
But that's one of the important roles of and this idea that there's a place for anybody who wants to, who's curious enough or ambitious or motivated to change it. Even if it's not in the front, it might be come talk to Kim and share your thoughts with her. And you know, we should all be open to hearing the experiences about others so that we can really give more than just Kim's feedback, more than just Mark's feedback, but like a collective set of experiences and realize that they're different. And we do better by hearing them all, even if it's, you know, only one speaker and there's a responsibility for that speaker to share more than just their own opinion.
Wow, I think anyone, so many people watching, and especially me, I can relate to this idea of empowerment and taking back control, and the idea of we may have these diseases, but they don't have us. And this is one way to demonstrate that. And I just, with the few minutes we have left, I, you know, Kim, you said you never know who you're going to influence. Does anyone have like one specific story that they want to tell about when you know that sharing your clinical trial experience resulted in a direct benefit for another person, or something that made you feel really good about doing that?
I have one of my favorite poems or stories is a Starfish story that I heard at summer camp, and we won't go through it because of time, but look it up, the Starfish story, or the Star Thrower. And so I had an experience where I went to an infantile, severe version of my condition conference. I clearly wasn't that case, and I got a letter from one of the moms that she had met me on the shuttle from the airport to the hotel, and we didn't talk, but she somehow knew that I was there. So like, even literally in that case, just showing up made a difference. And she sent me this really wonderful, heartfelt letter that I kind of kept. And there's been a lot of stories like that you know, you don't want to believe in too much, because, you know, at least I have a fragile ego in the sense of it can run away at any point. But these stories are really important reminders of literally showing up and smiling it can make a difference. And so everything that you do beyond that is just like you're in bonus territory. So just, yeah, try out with that, starting something, and you never know who it impacts.
Bonus territory. I think all of you are in bonus territory for sure. And Ryan, I think your quote's going to be going viral here, but doing something a bunch of times and you look back and you've done something.
I'm just taking credit for Mark's words.
It was that Mark, or was that combined attribution then?
I think that was combined. That was combined.
Yes, you do something, anything that you were comfortable with, because you never know who you're going to impact. So this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for paying me forward once again, and for everyone for joining us today. And I know that SysScript wanted to make sure that all of you are aware of all sorts of resources available to learn more. They would, if you reach out to SysScript, they would be happy to help you and advise you in different ways to share your story and pay it forward. And the link at the bottom, I'll point out, because it's our Every Life Foundation new story bank, and we have a question in there about sharing your experience on clinical trials. So please do check that out. And let's see, these are infographics from the previous 2 webinars this year, and you can find those on the SysScript website as well. And this closes our journey. The Every Life Foundation and myself are happy to be a part of it, of this 3-part series with Global Genes and NORD. So thank you so much. This has been just definitely the high point of my week. And thank you all. Thank you for joining.